The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll. We have two polls that we would love for you to take a moment to answer today, if you don't mind. If you don't mind answering this poll, I'm going to leave it up for a few minutes, and then I'll share the results with you. The question is, are you using Power BI in the cloud or on-premise? I'll leave it up for... That's true, we should have a both option, Jason. Great idea. We have neither, but we didn't add a both. I'll leave it up for a couple more minutes or a couple more seconds so that everyone has a chance to answer, and then I'll close it and launch our second poll. Okay, so it's pretty split even. So 38% of you are using it on the cloud, 38% of you are using it on-premise, and 24% of you are not utilizing Power BI yet. So this is interesting. I actually thought it'd be a lot more on-premise, so this is kind of interesting. I'm going to launch our second poll. If you guys wouldn't mind taking a brief moment to answer this one. This is our last poll before I turn it over to Jean. This is, are you in charge of implementing your organization's Power BI enterprise strategy? Pretty simple yes or no question here, so nothing you need to think about. I'll leave it up for a couple more seconds, and then I'll share the results. Okay. So this is also split pretty evenly. 53% of you are not in charge of implementing your organization's Power BI enterprise strategy, and 47% of you are, so that's pretty interesting. All right, I'm going to hide this. I am recording this session. It will be available on our website under past webinars at a later date, probably by the end of this week. And Jean, if you're ready, I'm going to switch screens and make you presenter.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
And can everyone see my screen?
I can.
And which screen are you seeing?
The slide deck, but it's not full screen mode.
Sorry, what was that?
It's not full screen mode. Do you know what I mean? Like,
are you see? Okay, are you seeing my desktop or?
Yeah, I was seeing the slide deck, and now it moved over, and I'm seeing the GoToWebinar screen.
Okay, let me switch this around real quick.
Sure.
I got my monitors mixed up, and I'm gonna stop this, and we will try this again. Oops, it keeps opening in the wrong window. Let's see. Sorry, guys. Erica or Rachel, how do I switch it to the other screen?
You know.
Oh wait, I got it now.
You got it. Okay.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, great. Sorry about that. Okay. So, my name's Jean Hayes, and I'm a senior consultant at Pragmatic Works, and I've had over 10 years of consulting in the Microsoft BI stack. And today we're going to talk about delivering Power BI across the organization. So this webinar is intended for those of you who will be rolling out Power BI to more than just a few users, especially those outside of IT. And you might have some questions and concerns about this. And sorry for all you people that joined and are using the on-premises version. Of course, you're welcome to sit through this, but a lot of the focus is going to be on the Power BI service, just because there's so many differences between the way those two are implemented, especially when it comes down to things like gateways and app workspaces and things like that. I'm also going to assume that most of you understand Power BI Desktop versus Power BI in the Power BI service, and understand the basic constructs of Power BI, such as a Power BI Desktop file, Power BI reports, and data sets. So I've been involved in a number of Power BI rollouts for quite a few different clients. And the items I have listed here have been consistent concerns on all the rollouts I've been involved with. These include controlling the costs of the Power BI deployment, managing users, managing and securing data, ensuring data integrity, collaborating and sharing reports, change management, and versioning for Power BI. So what we'll discuss today are some of the most important features of Power BI that will help us address those concerns. So we're going to look at Power BI licensing to help you choose which options fit your organization's needs. We'll look at dataset options, meaning what are your data sources and how should you bring those into your reports. We'll look at row-level security for securing the data in your Power BI reports, along with data gateways, which are used in the service to access and refresh data in the Power BI service. We'll review app workspaces and apps for sharing and collaborating on your reports. And this will be followed by Power BI templates, which will also include, hold on a sec. Sorry about that. I keep getting these calls from somebody named Scam Likely. I wish they would quit calling me. Okay. Anyhow, so we're going to review app workspaces and apps for sharing and collaborating on your reports, followed by Power BI templates. And we'll include some points on versioning options for Power BI desktop files. So I have a ton of information to share with you guys, so let's just get started. So the first thing we're going to look at is licensing, and you'll need to pick the licensing option that's the best fit for your organization. Choosing the right licensing option can help you control costs and must be considered for sharing reports. So the licensing options include the free license, and that's without Power BI Premium, Power BI Pro, and then Power BI Premium. So let's look at BI licensing in terms of how the users in your organization will be using Power BI. First, there's self-service BI. This is one person getting information and building reports for themselves in an ad hoc or exploratory way and not sharing the reports with others. They also have no need for leveraging other people's reports. These users may be just fine with a free license. They develop in Power BI Desktop only and publish to their own workspace in the Power BI service. They do not share reports with others, and others do not share reports with them. Then there's Team BI, where you have one or more people creating and sharing reports with a small audience. And there's very little IT involvement or control. A pro license is required by anyone who wants to create and share reports with others, and also by anyone who wants to access reports created and shared by others, unless you go with Power BI Premium, which we'll talk about on the next slide. Sharing and collaborating begins after a report is created in Power BI Desktop and published to an app workspace in the Power BI service. Reports and dashboards can also be shared in apps, which provide controlled read-only access to the reports and dashboards. So then the Pro license is $9.99 per month per user. Then we have corporate BI, where one or more developers create and then share reports to a larger audience. Typically, there are defined requirements and standards to adhere to and more IT control. Or you may need a hybrid solution, where some reports fit the corporate BI model, but you still want to allow power users to create and manage reports within their own team. So what you could do is purchase Pro licenses for all your end users who will be creating reports or consuming reports created via others, or you could purchase Power BI Premium. With Power BI Premium, you only need to purchase Pro licenses for people who are creating and publishing reports. Read-only users need the free license and can view reports published to apps in the Power BI service. The minimum pricing is about $5,000 a month, which makes it a cost-effective solution if you have more than 500 users. But there are other advantages of Power BI Premium you should consider. So like I said, you'll want to look at the number of users who will be using Power BI, but also Power BI Premium offers dedicated hardware for your Power BI tenant versus the shared capacity, where resources are shared with other organizations. With the shared capacity, a data set can be scheduled to refresh up to 8 times per day, where in Power BI Premium, there is no limit on refresh schedules. You can also leverage Power BI APIs to build your own applications, which pull data and reports from the Power BI service. You also have more storage per data set and per app workspace, which is 1 gigabyte per data set or app workspace for shared capacity versus 10 gigabytes for premium capacity. And finally, Microsoft also throws in the on-premises version of Power BI, the Power BI report server. So I'm assuming that all you guys that said that you're using both, you're using Premium and then leveraging both of these products for different applications. So with all that being said, your licensing options really boil down to whether you purchase Power BI Pro licenses for all your end users who need to create reports or who need to view reports created by other people, or purchase Power BI Premium, taking into account the number of Power BI users with view-only access, along with the other advantages offered by Power BI Premium. So next, we're going to look at data set options in Power BI, which do have an impact on your enterprise deployment. We will see how your choices can help you manage your users and data, ensure quality, and leverage data sets across different reports. So we're going to take a look at the different Power BI data set connection types. I'm going to compare live connection to analysis services for Power BI versus imported data sets, which I think is important to consider when you're ready to deploy Power BI across an organization. We will also cover some nuances with multidimensional cubes in Power BI, and then we'll look at using the Power BI service itself as a data source, which can be very useful with an enterprise deployment of Power BI. Power BI supports connecting to data from many different data sources, with SQL, Excel, and analysis services just being a few. Power BI has different methods for bringing data into the Power BI service depending upon the data source. First, we have live connections, where data live outside of the Power BI service, and the data model resides within that data source. So this would be like analysis services, either tabular or multidimensional. We have import data, where the data is extracted and imported into Power BI and then modeled in Power BI. So that could be SQL, that could be flat files, anything that you want to mash up together and then do your modeling right within Power BI. Then there's direct query, where data lives outside of Power BI, but modeled inside Power BI. And streaming data sets, where data is outside of the Power BI service and pushed into Power BI, where you can then create visualizations against it. So note that you cannot combine types of connections when creating Power BI reports. Live connection and direct query must pull from a single data source, which is either analysis services or a SQL-based database. With imported data, all data is pulled into a Power BI data set and modeled from there. You cannot import data from some tables or flat files and then pull in data from a streaming service or from a live connection or a direct query source into that same data set. So for this webinar, we're going to look at using live connections to analysis service data versus import data for enterprise deployment of Power BI. You could use direct query with an enterprise deployment. This can be very slow because all the queries are sent from Power BI, then run in the data source before sending the results back to Power BI in real time. This should only be considered for very small data sets where you need real-time data or against highly optimized data sources. So let's review Live Connection, where Power BI connects directly to a source where the data has already been modeled. This is for analysis services, tabular models, and multidimensional cubes. And I would also include data sets previously published to the Power BI service. Relationships, hierarchies, and calculations are already modeled, so no modeling is done within Power BI, only report creation. And row-level security is configured against the data source rather than in Power BI. With import data, data is extracted from the data source into tables and modeled in Power BI. This is very similar to defining an analysis services tabular model. However, the relationships between tables, hierarchies, and calculations are then defined and only exist in Power BI. Row-level security is initiated in Power BI Desktop with the user assignment to roles being set in the data set in the Power BI service. So as part of your enterprise deployment plan, I would encourage you to consider using analysis services for your data set. If you have models or cubes already, that's great. If not, you should know creating an analysis tabular model is nearly identical to defining a data set in Power BI and offers a lot of advantages, including reusability, more control over the model or data set, better data integrity, and better source control tools. Okay, so now we're going to do a comparison between defining a data set in Power BI and importing the data into a report versus a data set in analysis services and connecting via Live Connection in the Power BI service. So first, with Dataset Edit Access, we have for import data, so any user with edit access to the app workspace can change the data set. There's no separation. Once you have edit access, there's no separation between who can edit a report versus a data set. With analysis services, typically that's contained within IT, and only people that have full control in analysis services can change the data set. Security. So with import data, as I said earlier, the data access and security is configured in Power BI Desktop and in the Power BI service. And I'm talking more row-level security here. With analysis services, the row-level security is defined as roles in analysis services, and data access carries over to the report in Power BI. So sharing outside of the organization. So data, for import data, data lives in Power BI. So it can be shared outside of the organization to those who do not have access to the data source, if this is a feature that's enabled in your tenant settings. So that can be a good thing or a bad thing depending upon your individual circumstances. With analysis services, this isn't supported at all. And that's because the data lives in analysis services, and they need to have their Windows account be activated to use that. Redundancy, and with import data, the data must be published and refreshed. The data set must be published and refreshed in each app workspace that needs it. So if you went and modeled a data set and you want to deploy it to a bunch of different groups, you would have to publish that to different app workspaces unless you just have one app workspace. With analysis services, there really isn't any redundancy since the source data lives in analysis services, not in Power BI. Okay, so other reporting tools. So with a Power BI data set, that's import data, you can build Power BI reports, and you can also analyze in Excel. And that's a feature that analyzes the data set with Excel. And then with live connection, you can use all kinds of different tools. It's nothing to do with Power BI. So you can use reporting services, Tableau, Excel outside of the Power BI service. And you could still use Analyze in Excel and Power BI. So from a storage standpoint, for import data, since the data is actually stored within the in a data set in the service, this increases the power. This increases the storage that you use in the service. With analysis services, it's very minimal since the data is stored on premises or in the Azure, if you're using Azure Analysis Services. For refresh, so the refresh of the data is managed in Power BI and configured for each data set. For import data, for analysis services, the refresh of data is managed on premises. So you don't need to schedule a refresh in Power BI. There's a cached refresh, but otherwise the data should be ready to go as soon as your cube or tabular model is processed. Source data mashup. So with import data, you can import data from disparate data sources into your Power BI data set. For analysis services, this isn't allowed. Only data from the cube or tabular model is included. So if you needed to mash up data from different sources, you would actually have to bring, you would have to bring all those sources into your tabular model and do your modeling there. Measures and calculations. So these are created in Power BI for imported data and can be changed by any user with edit access to the app workspace. For analysis services, they're created in analysis services, and they can't be changed in Power BI, but you can actually add new measures. For dimensions and columns, the column names can be changed, and you can create hierarchies in the data set or in the report. For analysis services, you can change names on a visualization, but not in the data set itself. And any hierarchies that were created in analysis services will be carried over to Power BI. So availability. If the source is down, the report contains data from the previous refresh. If analysis services is down and it's not in a high availability cluster, the report is not available. So development versioning. So there's you got a couple different options. You could use OneDrive for versioning, or you could also create a Visual Studio solution and import your Power BI desktop file into that solution and version in TFS. Or you could use any other versioning tool like SVN, or even just if you have some backups on your network drive, whatever. With analysis services, typically since the development's in Visual Studio, most people integrate that with TFS. So here's a summary of the advantages of both. So with import data, you've got a lot more flexibility, especially for your power users. You have sharing outside of the organization, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. You have your report contains data from the last refresh if the source server is down, and power users can build data sets instead of IT. But just be wary of some technical debt. You just want to be a little bit careful that they're not creating things that might go against your quality standards or anything like that. And then live connection to analysis services. You do have that single version of the truth. IT has more control over the data set, which also could be a good thing or a bad thing. Visual Studio, you can use that for versioning, and you can also use that for deployment to QA and prod environments. The data set can be used by other tools outside of Power BI and analyze in Excel. There's unlimited refresh. You can refresh as many times a day as you want, and it'll all get updated in Power BI. And also there's minimal data storage in Power BI. So here's some use cases. So you might want to consider using import data for more of that team BI that we talked about earlier, where you just have a few people collaborating and developing reports for their own use. For ad hoc analysis, one-off reports, prototypes. So if you want to prototype what you might want to build later in a tabular model, this would be a great place to do that. And sharing reports outside of the organization. If you need to do that, this would be the way to do it. For a live connection to analysis services, that's more typically for corporate BI as well as team BI. And if you need more control over the data and you want to ensure that it's meeting your standards. And then also, if you've got the same data set that's going to be used over and over by many different reports and by different users, that would be another reason to use analysis services. So that being said, a hybrid approach is great for many organizations, and that's where power users can actively build models for their own use within their areas of the business. And once that's proven out, those can even be moved to analysis services for greater distribution. So a lot of organizations have existing multidimensional cubes that they would like to use as data sources for Power BI. So most features and multidimensional cubes are supported in Power BI. And that includes display folders, KPIs, your members, dimension attributes, image URLs, dimension security, format strings, hierarchies, all that stuff carries over. But there's a few things that Power BI does not support. So cell security. So if you have cell security implemented, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, if a user is restricted from a cell, they cannot connect to the cube at all. So, and also the actions are not supported, and name sets. And name sets is a biggie for a lot of people, just because a lot of people use the date calculation patterns, like current year, prior year, rolling 90 days, all that kind of stuff. And those won't be available to you in Power BI. So what if you want to start your enterprise deployment, but you're still in prototype mode, or maybe you don't have the resources for analysis services, or maybe you don't have buy-in from management to deploy analysis services? What else can you do to enforce some data integrity and reuse of data sets? Well, using the Power BI service as a data source for enterprise deployment can help with this. This will allow you to leverage data sets that were previously published to Power BI. So first, let's review what happens when a Power BI desktop report is published to the Power BI service. It actually creates a new report and a new data set. If many reports are needed for different audiences over the same data set, this can cause issues with data integrity and increase the storage in the Power BI service. This is especially a problem for data sets and import data into the service instead of using a live connection. So as you can see here, we've got 4 different reports, 4 different data sets. So instead, you can define a Power BI data set and Power BI desktop, publish it to the app workspace in the Power BI service. And then for subsequent reports that need that data set, you can choose the Power BI service as the source for your report. So here I've got a screenshot of the get data. You go to online services, and there should be an option there for Power BI service. You can see now how many reports leverage a single data set instead of a new data set for every report. Using the Power BI service as a source reduces storage in the Power BI tenant, speeds up report development times since the model already exists, improves data integrity since all reports will pull data from the same data set with the same calculations, hierarchies, and column names, reduces administration with fewer data refreshes that need to be scheduled in Power BI, and reduces the load on the source server and the Power BI service when the data is refreshed. One limitation with using the Power BI service as a data source is that when you publish a new report, it automatically publishes to the app's workspace where the data set exists. You can't create a report in one app workspace that pulls data from a data set in a different app workspace. So if you want the data set, so this isn't allowed. So here I've got this app workspace, there's one data set, 3 different reports. I can't have another app workspace and that data set's just not going to be available. And I could even, and when you're in Power BI Desktop, when you do the option to say Power BI Service is your source, it doesn't even give you an option of where to publish it. It just automatically goes there. So if you want the data set in a different app workspace, what you could do is publish the Power BI Desktop file that contains that source data set to the other app workspace. If there are reports defined in the same Power BI Desktop file as a data set and you don't want those reports in the other app workspace, save the Power BI Desktop file to a new Power BI Desktop file, delete all the visualizations, and publish to the other app workspace where the data set can be leveraged. I would probably do that ahead of time, even if I knew that I want to create this data set and I want it to go to many different app workspaces, I would probably just create this data set itself as a Power BI Desktop file, and then all the other reports and visualizations that would be created as separate Power BI Desktop files. So in a nutshell, both analysis services and Power BI service sources can help you manage your end users and data, since you would have fewer data sets to configure security against. And you also have less data deployed in the Power BI service, which saves space and results in fewer data set refreshes. They help ensure data quality since the data sets are reusable and cannot be changed by end users. And pro users can just focus on creating reports and dashboards, not creating relationships, measures, and data elements. So next, we're going to talk about securing your data in Power BI with row-level security for analysis services data sets and for imported data sets. And then we'll touch on dynamic row-level security. Roles can be created in both analysis services, multidimensional, and tabular databases to give overall permissions to individual users or Active Directory groups, and to further define data access. Role-level security defines what data the end user can see. For example, individual salespeople may be granted access to see data in their territory or region. Role-level security is implemented through dimension data security in multidimensional cubes and through role filters and tabular models. When the user accesses a Power BI report over this data, they only see the data that is available to them according to the analysis services role. Multidimensional analysis services roles also allow cell security to be assigned, granting and revoking user access to a measure in a cube. For example, hiding salary data from non-managers or product costs from salespeople. However, be aware that this is not supported in Power BI. If a user does not have access to a measure in a cube through cell security, they won't have access to that cube at all. So for data imported into Power BI, role-level security is a two-step process. So first, you set the filters in the Power BI desktop file via the Manage Roles options. And then this is done via a DAX expression to filter the data. So here I've got sales territory is North America for this new role called North America region. Then after you publish your data set to the Power BI service, you just add users or groups who belong to this role. So here I've got the row level security, and then you basically just put in your users that can only see North American, the North American sales data. You will also need to determine if you should implement dynamic security in your enterprise deployment. So username functions and DAX or MDX expressions can be leveraged in both analysis services and Power BI to simplify the implementation of row-level security in your organization. Configuration of dynamic security is dependent upon each implementation and should be considered when implementing row-level security. However, dynamic security can impact model performance, and that's because every time a user signs in, check and see what they have access to. So if you want to access data from your on-premises data sources, which could be SQL databases, analysis services, or flat files, you will need to configure the on-premises data gateway for Power BI. This is needed if you're going to connect to analysis services via live connection or to refresh imported data sets in the Power BI service. First, you install the gateway on the server with your domain, then finish the configurations in the service. You'll want to install the on-premises gateway onto a server that is close to your primary data sources. High availability clusters for on-premises data gateway are now supported since the November 2017 release. If the primary gateway is not available, requests from the Power BI service for on-premises data will be routed to the other gateway. Then create the gateway in the Power BI service, and then add data sources. Data sources must be set up in the Power BI gateway for each on-premises data source to be used in a data set if the data is to ever be accessed from the Power BI service, either for data refresh or live connection. This includes SQL, analysis services, and files on a network drive. So here's a screenshot for creating the gateway. There's not much to it. You just need to provide the name of your gateway and then some contact information if you want. Oh, as well as you would also add your administrators. So that's who can set up and configure these settings. Next, you configure the data sources. So this is a screenshot for configuring analysis services sources. The server and database name must be identical to the data source name in the Power BI dataset. If a server name is specified in the Power BI dataset, you can't put the IP address here and expect Power BI to recognize it. Below the username and credentials are the username and password here are the credentials used to make the initial connection to analysis services. Now here's a screenshot for a connection to a SQL source. Again, you have to make sure the server and database names are identical to the names in the Power BI dataset. You will also need to add users who can create and publish reports using this data source. If your Power BI user account names do not match the UPNs of your Windows account usernames, you need to map all the Microsoft account usernames to the UPNs. The UPN name looks like an email address, and you can use the Who Am I command on the user's workstation to find out what it is. There's more information about it in this link. I actually had a client that did this. They weren't using Outlook for or Office 365 for their email, so we actually had to go in and do this for every single person that was going to be creating and publishing reports. So for analysis services, after you set up the data source in the gateway, you really don't have too much to do for configuring the data set since it's a live connection. You can go into the dataset settings to validate that the dataset is connected to the data source and change the cache refresh settings if you want to. So here you should just see this message that it says it's online. If it all says it's online, you're good to go. For SQL and other on-premises data, you will need to set the refresh schedule of when to pull data in from your on-premises data into the Power BI data set. And this is for imported data sources. So here, down here, it's like, it's just showing how many times or what your schedule is. So for our enterprise deployments of Power BI, it's critical to understand how to configure and manage the on-premises data gateway for access to your data sources. This link will walk you through all the aspects you need to know. Okay, so for Power BI enterprise deployments, it's also important to understand how to share your data sets and reports to other users. The Power BI service has two features that allow you to do this. First, there's the Power BI app workspaces, which allow users to share data sets and reports and collaborate within the Power BI service. And second, you have Power BI apps, which allows you to share reports to the organization at large. So first, a Power BI Pro user creates an app workspace, and then you can add other Pro users to whom they want to share the report and data set with. So we got a person here, they publish to the app workspace. Then dashboards can be created by this user or any of the other users that have access to that app workspace. And they can include any tiles from any report in that app workspace on the dashboard. And then when they're ready to deliver the dashboards and reports to others, they can publish the app workspace to an app where other users can view the reports and dashboards. So down here, these are Pro users or free Power BI Premium users, and they have read-only access to these. So with app workspaces and apps, you can bundle dashboards, reports, and data sets for delivery via an app. Select which Power BI objects are deployed to an app. Analyze data set in Excel as well as view reports, and create different reports leveraging the same data set in the app workspace via Power BI Service Data Source connection. Another thing you can do for enterprise deployment of Power BI is set up QA or UAT environments via apps. And this will help you ensure the quality of your data before publishing to a production app workspace. So here I've outlined a sample process for leveraging app workspaces and apps for testing in a QA environment before promoting to a production app workspace. So first, we're creating an app workspace for QA in the Power BI service. Then let's say that we are storing all our Power BI reports in TFS. So I open that Power BI report from Visual Studio. And then in here, I edit the settings and enter the QA server and database. So assuming I have a QA tabular model here, and this example is just using tabular. And then I publish to the QA app workspace. So now all the data sets and reports are available here. From there, I can create the dashboards, and then we can publish from the app workspace to a QA app. And then I have the QA people, they go in and they do their testing. And then if there's any issues, if there's no issues, then great, they sign off. If not, they log the issue and they can go back to dev. And then if everything did sign off, everything looks great, we'd follow a very similar process for promoting to production, where we go in and we edit the settings and then publish to whatever that what that other app workspace is that I want for my production app. So here are a few things to be aware of with app workspaces. So if a user is given edit access to Power BI app workspace, and Power BI defined role level security for Power BI defined role level security for import data sets will not work for them. They will still be able to see all the data. I've run into this a few times where people are like, hey, role level security is not working for this person. And I'm like, well, what access do they have to that workspace? Well, they're an editor. And it's like, well, sorry, they have access to all the data then. There's no separation there. And then it's also not recommended to create reports or change data sets in the Power BI service. I would do all my changes to reports and data sets in Power BI desktop and then publish. And the big reason is just because there's no backup and versioning. And some of my colleagues and I have talked about this, and they've run into quite a few issues with clients who were creating reports in the service, and then they were basically hosed when somebody changed something or overwrote something. They had no backup whatsoever. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is using Power BI desktop templates. Power BI desktop files can be saved as Power BI desktop templates and distributed to pro users to provide a starting point for creating new Power BI reports. So here, all we do is do a save as, and then you change the type to PBIT, Power BI template. So with Power BI desktop templates, the data isn't saved within the template. So only the data model and any visualizations that you might have in there. So it leaves a very small footprint. And then when the user opens the template, it initiates a new untitled Power BI desktop. So this makes it hard for them to overwrite that initial report unless they intentionally give it the same name. So Power BI desktop templates are really useful for sharing live connections to analysis cubes or tabular models, for sharing imported data sets to be published within different app workspaces, and I think we talked about that a bit. Sharing the Power BI service connections to prevent pro users from creating new imported data sets. Speeding up development time by sharing models and commonly used reports. Creating and sharing corporate color schemes and branding. Having your favorite custom visualizations on hand to add to a new report without having to re-import them from the Power BI store over and over. And I do that a lot. So this is one of my favorite things to do. Defining parameterized queries for filtering imported data. Training pro users in Power BI desktop, and including some complex DAX calculations or other techniques that can be shared to others. So if you want to give somebody an example of how to do bookmarks, or you've got some crazy time calculations or something in there, you could definitely share that. So that kind of brings us to the end. So in summary, these are the things we talked about. So when it comes to controlling costs of Power BI deployment, one of the big things here is your licensing. So it's basically looking at, do you buy pro licenses for your enterprise, or do you use Power BI Premium? Managing users, we talked about whether they're team BI versus corporate BI, what your approach is, or hybrid approach. Data set options. So, role level security is one way to manage your data from your users, and also analysis services roles. On-premises data gateway, that, we talked about that, where we have to map your Power BI account name to the UPNs if they don't match in Azure Active Directory, or and then apps and app workspaces. So that gives you control over who can see what reports and dashboards and what access they have. Manage and secure data. So for data set options, we talked about role level security, sharing data outside of organization. So either imported data or not sharing because it's an analysis services. On-premises data gateway helps you with access to your on-premises data sources, refresh from on-premises data sources, and the high availability clusters are now available. Okay, and then ensuring data integrity, we spent a bit of time comparing the live connection to analysis services versus imported data, and also using Power BI service as a source. Apps and app workspaces, if you set up QA and UAT environments for your, if you've got some corporate BI type Power BI desktop, that would be a good practice. Collaborating and sharing, you need to know about licensing, make that decision on how you want to go there. And basically, if you're going to collaborate and share, you need either the Pro license or Power BI Premium. Dataset options, so that gives you the live connection to analysis services, and then you can share your models. And then apps and app workspaces, so that's either sharing reports, dashboards, and data collaboration in Team BI or within IT. You can bundle your reports, dashboards, and data sets to larger audiences, and then you can leverage the Power BI service as source within the app workspace. And then Power BI templates, sharing PI desktop sources, corporate branding, and more. And then finally, change management. We talked about that just a little bit, but you could use TFS, OneDrive for versioning or anything else. And also app workspaces, you can make sure that your change management processes are working appropriately. Finally, here's a list of some different references, and I believe that Rachel will probably be, if people want this Power BI, or I'm sorry, this PowerPoint, they can ask Rachel and she'll send it to you. And we've got all these references here.
Yes, and we've also recorded this session, and the video will be posted on our website under past training sessions by the end of the week. We do have some questions, Jean, and we have a little bit of time. Do you want me to go through some of them?
Sure.
Okay, so the first one is, I have, it's kind of a direct question. I'm not sure if we're going to answer like project-specific questions, but I'll go ahead and ask it to you to see what you think. I have multiple external agents that need to use a single report, but only see their own data. Is this possible?
Okay, can you say that a little bit slower? Sure. Multiple agents?
I have multiple external agents that need to use a single report, but only see their own data. Is this possible?
Yep. So yeah, you could either do that with analysis. If you're saying that they're external agents, I'm assuming they're not in your domain. So yes, you could do that with imported data, and then you would set up the row level security there.
Okay, perfect. The next question is, does Microsoft plan to deliver server level data sources at an on-premise gateway, or will we always have to add all the databases in the report as separate data sources in the gateway cluster?
So, can you repeat that?
Yeah, it was kind of complicated.
I wish I could read. You don't have a list of the questions I can read, yeah. Okay.
Let me see if I can, hold on one second.
Okay, no, that's okay. Go ahead.
So it says, do you know if Microsoft plans to deliver server level data sources in an on-premise gateway, or do you think we will always have to add all the databases in a report as separate data sources in the gateway cluster?
I guess I honestly don't know what Microsoft is thinking there. I guess I would see if you've got this data set and it's in a different app workspace and in a different report, then yeah, you definitely would have to define that. I don't think that is how it works for analysis services though, because you just have that one cube. I think if you have that one connection and then as long as everything is connected the same, I don't believe you have to set that one up, a bunch of different times.
Okay, great. So the next question we have, and we're probably not going to be able to get through all the questions because there's quite a few. Are the pro licenses named or concurrent?
Are they named? I believe that that you can swap them. I've actually been at some clients when they were just getting started, and the pro licenses become part of your Office 365 profile. And so what they do is you basically switch between that license. So if somebody wants a license, you just have to grant it to them and take it away from somebody else if you have a concern about sharing those licenses.
Okay,
So
great.
you need one. You need one for every single user that's going to be using.
So the next question is, can you manage SSRS and Power BI?
The only in the Power BI service, the only thing that I've seen with SSRS is that you're able to, and this is a few months ago, and maybe they've changed and I'm just not aware. The only thing that you can do is publish basically a static report to a dashboard. There's no interaction or anything like that with it. With the on-premises version, which is Power BI Report Server, it's all kind of you've got basically one portal that has your Power BI reports along with your SSRS reports.
Okay, great. The next question is, can you embed dashboards and reports in SharePoint or web applications for Power BI Pro consumers?
I believe so, but I should double check on that.
Okay. How is licensing affected if you have an SA contract?
I'm not sure.
That might be a question better for Microsoft since we don't deal with licensing.
Yes.
I think it's a Microsoft question. We don't sell licensing,
Usually,
so
yeah,
we're not
mostly,
sure.
yeah. By the time I get involved with anything, people already usually have their Power BI tenant set up, and yeah.
Okay, so if end users want to use a data set in an app workspace, do they have to save the report in that same app workspace?
Yes.
Okay. And we're only going to ask a couple more questions because we're running out of time. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Power BI Premium Server should be installed separately, like SSRS, this is a question, in the virtual remote machine.
Should Power BI
Premium Server be installed separately, like SSRS, in a virtual and remote machine?
Are you talking about the gateway? Usually the gateway is installed on a separate server. And I've seen people do it just on the same server. They've got analysis services and they install it on there. But yeah, a lot of people just will spin up a little VM and put the Power BI gateway on there.
Okay, great. And we're only going to take one more question. There are more questions, but we will send them to Jean at the end of this session, and she can take time to write about them in a blog or answer directly or however she chooses. The last question is, when you promote from QA to production app, do you need to recreate all the dashboards?
Nope. Well, yes. Let me think. Yes, you would, because that would be, yeah. Because you can't cross over, because the dashboards only exist in the Power BI service, and you can't import from one app workspace to another. So yes, you would need to recreate those dashboards.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Jean, for this wonderful session, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we will post this later this week.
Thanks, Rachel. Bye.
Bye, everyone.